We'll take a look at a couple other ways in which we can compose views in Enscape. The first thing we want to do before moving on to another area might be to save our current settings. If we want to get back and, like I mentioned in the previous video, make our efforts that we're doing repeatable so that we don't have to redo settings that we were adjusting on the fly potentially previously, we can save those settings so that we can get back to them later. And so now that we've saved those settings, we're going to adjust the depth of field back to 0 so the model is nice and crisp and we can go look at another area in the building. I'm going to position myself here in the model, press the space bar so that I'm stuck to the ground. But what this also allows us to do is sort of back up without accidentally going too far and perhaps going through a wall. One of the things that we might notice in this particular view, seeing as we can see outside the building, is we see this stark horizon line. Enscape in the visual settings dialog offers some nice automatic backgrounds that we can use. These are great early on in the project when you just want to indicate that you're on a site and not just in the middle of the desert and seeing that stark horizon line. So if your site is somewhat wooded, you could select this one called Forest. If it happens to be in a mountainous area, you can select that option. There's a construction site option. Town and urban are both similar with various buildings in the background. We'll leave it on forest, which provides some nice trees in the background. Notice there's also an option to rotate the background. I'm going to move Revit out of the way for a little bit. So as we rotate the background image, if we want a little bit different look in the background based on the options available in this 360-degree image, we can rotate that. The beautiful thing about using a skybox, which is what this is that it adds more life to the image, and this background even shows up in reflections, whether it's on a glass table or these glass walls. Should be pointed out too that glass in Enscape, or I should say actually glass in Revit, often starts out as a material that's not very reflective. So if we go into the material dialog and type glass and pick this most basic glass material, which is usually in most projects, you'll see the reflectance value is rather low. So on an exterior rendering, for example, or potentially even interior, you might consider bumping that up so that the surfaces of the glass are more reflective, and then sort of give that more lively, this is glass feel. You see that there's a little bit more reflection happening in the glass. And then similar to what we did in the previous video is adjusting the depth of field. Can be nice to sort of just blur out the background a little bit, and even potentially you see the person's face sort of got blurred out a little bit so that exactly who that might be or look like isn't distracting. And then once we find a vantage point that we like, we can render this image. Another thing that's nice to consider when creating a still image is the field of view. So this really wide 90-degree angle field of view, or 14.5 millimeter lens equivalent, is nice for when you're navigating the model in real time, but oftentimes architectural photography is something more like 50 degrees, or you can see it's like a 35 millimeter lens. Just so things aren't quite so distorted. If it's a smaller space, architectural photographers will certainly use a wider angle lens, but you may want to consider this and see if you can compose a view that looks good so that it's not too distorted. So here you can see we're sort of going down the steps. So here's a nice view. We could save this back to Revit so that we can print this again if we decide to make some changes to the furniture layout. On the Enscape tab, we'll select Create View. Enscape, we'll call it Level 2 Waiting Area. So now there's a new view. We'd want to make sure we turn on the secondary design option if we start adding people to that area. And then we can render the image. We'll just hit save. And you can see it's exporting the image. And that's it for this particular video.